Wyoming Territory, spring of 1874. The wind came down from the Bighorn sharp and cold. But it was the sight of her that stopped Holden Rayner's horse in its tracks. She was walking alone along the rutted trail just south of KC. Her boots scuffed to ruin, the hem of her dress torn and dust plastered. Her auburn hair was tangled and hanging limp, and her arms hugged a small boy and girl to her sides like she feared the wind might steal them away. One look and Holden knew something was wrong. He dismounted without a second thought. "You lost?" he asked, stepping into her line of sight, hands open and far from the pistol on his hip. The woman flinched, pulling the children tighter. "I ain't here to hurt you," Holden said, his voice low and steady. "Name's Holden. You're not safe out here alone. Where you headed?" She didn't answer at first. Her eyes flicked down the trail behind her like she expected something or someone to come riding up fast. Then, quieter than a whisper, she said, "Nowhere." Holden's gaze moved to the boy, no older than 6, and the girl, maybe 4. Both were barefoot, cheeks hollow, eyes wide. Holden took off his hat. "You need help. Let me get you out of the sun. I got camp not far. Water, food, a fire." The woman hesitated, jaw tight, but the way her son leaned into her side, legs trembling, made the choice for her. "I'm Zinnia," she said finally. "Zinnia Kerrigan." Holden nodded once, then turned to help them mount up, careful not to startle her. He lifted the kids into the saddle first, then steadied her as she climbed up behind. Her fingers grazed his wrist, and he felt how cold they were. They rode in silence to his camp, tucked in a cottonwood grove beside a creek. Once there, Zinnia slid off the horse with the children and stood like she did not know what to do next. "Sit," Holden said, nodding to a log near the fire. "I'll get stew going." She didn't speak, but she obeyed. The boy, who Zinnia called Nolan, curled up beside the fire like a pup, and the girl Nora clung to Zinnia's arm without a word. Holden worked fast. He ladled out hot stew, handed over canteens, and sat a few feet away so they would not feel crowded. Nolan ate with both hands. Nora sucked down water like she had not tasted it in days. Zinnia, though, barely touched her food. "You ran," Holden said quietly, eyes on the fire. "From someone." Zinnia's jaw tensed. "Do not need to tell me now, or ever. But I ain't blind. You lookin' over your shoulder means someone's after you." She was quiet for a long while, then said, "Their father. He used to ride with a gang south of Cheyenne. Had a temper. When he drank, her voice broke. I had to get them out." Holden's chest tightened. He looked at the children, now dozing beside her, and said, "You did right." That night, Zinnia insisted on sleeping on the far side of the fire. She curled around the kids like a shield. Holden lay awake, staring at the stars, his thoughts tangled. The next morning, he went to check on his horse and found Zinnia standing barefoot at the creek, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing the kids' clothes with a stone. Her dress clung to her back, soaked through. That was when he saw them. Scars. Long, raised, and cruel, running like lash marks across her shoulder blades. His breath left him. She turned halfway, startled by the sound of his boots. Her hands fumbled to cover herself, but he was already there, taking off his coat, stepping into the creek. He draped it over her shoulders gently, his voice low. "No one will hurt you here." Zinnia froze. Then her lips trembled, and she turned away, shoulders shaking. Holden stood beside her, not touching, just close enough. "You do not need to say anything," he said. "But I meant it." Later, she let him help hang the clothes. She did not flinch when he handed her a clothespin. That night, she sat closer to the fire, closer to him. Over the next few days, Holden taught Nolan how to whittle. He carved the boy a wooden horse, and one morning, found Nora asleep against his leg, clutching it in her small hand. Zinnia watched him. He saw her watching. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the sky turned gold, Zinnia helped him gather kindling. They walked silently, shoulders brushing. "You were kind to us," Zinnia said finally, her voice soft. "You did not have to be." Holden looked at her, really looked. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," he said. "I am just trying to be the kind of man you and those kids deserve." Her eyes filled. She stepped closer, but did not reach for him. He did not push. Instead, he said, "You all can stay here as long as you need. No questions. No pressure. But if he comes looking..." Holden's jaw turned to stone. "I will not let him hurt you. Ever again." Zinnia finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she let her hand rest beside his on the ground beneath the stars, just barely touching. Holden did not move it, but he did not let go either. The wind softened in the weeks that followed, and the cottonwoods thickened with new green. Mornings came quiet, with birdsong threading through the leaves and the children's laughter beginning to return, tentative but real. Holden repaired the old trapper's cabin he'd half forgotten on the north edge of the creek. The roof had sagged in 2 places, and the stone hearth needed rebuilding, but the walls were sound. He didn't ask Zinnia if she wanted it, just worked on it steady, day by day, giving her space to choose. She chose one morning near the end of May, stepping inside just after he'd laid the last of the floorboards. "This was kind of you," she said, fingers trailing the smoothed pine. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied, setting down the hammer. "Didn't sit right. You and the little ones sleeping out under canvas." She gave a small nod, eyes tracing the sunlight slanting through the window frame. "It's been a long time since I had a room I could lock." Holden leaned against the doorframe. "You'll have it now." That night, when the children were asleep under quilts Zinnia had mended herself from scraps, she stood at the cabin's threshold while Holden banked the fire outside. "I used to keep a garden," she said, arms folded loosely. "Back in Nebraska. Grew squash, onions, sometimes beans if the soil didn't turn mean." He looked up from the flames. "You'd be welcome to plant what you like. There's a stretch of ground upriver, soft and low. I don't know if my hands remember." She glanced down at them. "They've been busy surviving. They held your children safe. That's worth more than any crop." Zinnia turned her face toward the trees, her profile lit faintly by the firelight. "You say things like that, and I don't know what to do with them." "You don't need to do anything," he said. "I just speak what's true." The next morning, she was up before dawn with a shovel in hand, Nolan trailing behind her with a tin pail. They worked the riverbank together, and by afternoon, she had a rough patch turned and ready. Holden brought her a burlap sack of seed he'd kept from trading season leftover corn and a few squash seeds from the Crow women up past Powder River. She took them with quiet gratitude, her fingers brushing his longer than they needed to. A week passed, then another. Nora took to shadowing Holden as he checked the salt lick and moved the stock between pasture breaks. She had a way of tugging at his trouser leg when she wanted lifting, and after the 3rd time he stopped pretending to resist. "You trust easy," he told her once, swinging her up onto the saddle before him. "She remembers who's kind," Zinnia said from the fence rail, watching them. One evening, as dusk settled and the air grew thick with pine resin and damp earth, Zinnia sat beside Holden near the fire, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. The children were asleep inside the cabin, the door barred. "I was 16 when my father died," she said, eyes on the flames. "He was a quiet man, never raised his voice, never raised a hand. After he passed, I didn't know how to recognize danger when it came. I thought if I just endured, it would pass." Holden didn't interrupt. "I stayed too long," she continued, voice thin. Told myself I had to. For the children. For decency. But there's no decency in letting someone break you. She turned her face toward him, lit orange by firelight. But you've done more by standing still than he ever did by roaring. I ain't trying to be anything, Holden said. Just don't see why a man should be cruel. Zinnia reached out then, slowly, and placed her hand over his. I don't know what to call what's growing here, she said. But it feels real. Holden looked down at their joined hands. It is. She didn't pull away. That night, when the wind came through the cottonwoods, it passed over the cabin like a hush instead of a warning. Inside, Zinnia lay beside the children, one arm stretched across them, her other hand resting beneath her chin. But her eyes were open, and for the first time in years, she didn't dread the morning. By early June, the land turned fragrant under the weight of sun and rain, and Zinnia's garden sprouted in careful rows, green shoots pushing up through dark earth, her fingertips stained from coaxing life back into something that had nearly forgotten how to grow. Holden kept to his chores, but his eyes found her often kneeling among the rows, her dress gathered at the knees, face shaded by the wide-brimmed hat he'd left hanging by the door one morning without a word. She'd taken it, worn it, and never gave it back. One evening, as the sky dimmed to a soft copper, she stood outside the cabin, smoothing her skirt with both hands. I want to earn my keep, she said. Not just with the garden. Holden set down the bridle he'd been oiling. You already are. I mean it, she said, stepping closer. I can mend, cook, help you trade come fall. I know what to ask for. I used to run every barter my husband ever made. Holden studied her a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll ride into Buffalo next week. Supplies are low anyhow. Her fingers twitched at her sides. You trust me enough to take me into town? I trust you to ride beside me, he said. Not behind. The words settled between them, quiet and solid. They left 3 days later with Nolan and Nora bundled in the wagon bed, the children giggling over a pair of carved whistles Holden had whittled from willow bark that morning. Zinnia rode beside him on the bench seat, her hair pinned up tight, a woven shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes kept to the horizon, but her hands rested easy in her lap. Buffalo was dust-choked and bustling, with the railroad drawing more wagons and mouths than the town could rightly feed. Holden guided the wagon straight to the general store while Zinnia kept the children close at her sides. Inside, she moved with quiet precision, selecting flour, lye soap, and a small tin of sewing needles. At the counter, she bartered 2 of her mended quilts for salt pork and dried peaches. Her voice even, her gaze level. Holden said little, only stood behind her, arms folded, as the storekeep did his sums. Outside, as they loaded the wagon, a voice cut across the street. Well, I'll be damned. That you, Zinnia? She stopped short, her face draining of color. A man leaned against the post outside the saloon, hat tipped back, a bottle dangling from one hand. His shirt was torn at the collar, a revolver slung careless at his side. His eyes were slits, half drunk. You got nerve, he called, voice slurring. Runnin' off with my young uns. Holden stepped down before Zinnia could speak. He moved slow, deliberate, boots scuffing the dirt. You're gonna want to walk away, he said, voice low and steady. The man squinted. Who the hell are you? The man standing between you and the last mistake you ever make. The street hushed. The drunk straightened, but the sway in his knees betrayed him. She's my wife. No, Zinnia said, her voice clear. I was your property. I'm not anymore. Holden didn't touch his gun. He didn't have to. The way he stood, spine straight, eyes locked, made the man falter. Go on, Holden said, before you find out what it means to pick a fight with someone who's got nothing left to fear. The man spit into the dirt, muttered something under his breath, and stumbled back toward the saloon. Zinnia didn't move until he was gone. Then she turned to Holden, her mouth parted like she couldn't quite catch her breath. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know." They rode back in silence, the children dozing between sacks of grain. That night, after the wagon was unloaded and the moon hung low over the trees, Zinnia stepped outside the cabin barefoot. She stood by the fire pit Holden had just finished dousing, the embers still warm. "I thought I'd freeze when I saw him," she said. "But I didn't." Holden set the water bucket down. "You stood taller than he ever did." She looked at him, her eyes dark and steady. "I want to stay. Not just for shelter. Not just for the children." He didn't answer right away, just stepped forward until they stood close enough to feel each other breathe. "I want you here," he said. "Not because you need a place, but because it's yours now if you want it." She reached up, fingers brushing the edge of his jaw. "I want it," she whispered. He bent his head, slow, waiting. She met him halfway. Their lips touched with the quiet certainty of people who'd survived too much to rush anything. When they parted, her forehead rested against his chest, and his arms came around her, sure and solid. Inside, the children slept on, and the wind moved gentle through the grass, no longer hiding danger, only carrying the sound of a life beginning again. A soft rain settled over the land by the middle of June, soaking into the dirt and drawing out the scent of pine and sage so thick it hung in the air like breath. The cabin roof held through the weather, tight and dry, and Zinnia stood at the window with a length of cloth in her hands, watching the droplets gather on the sill. Holden was outside, tending the fencing after 2 of the yearlings had tested the line. She could see him through the glass, his hat tipped low, shirt clinging to his back from the rain. His movements were precise, never rushed, and never idle. She noticed how he paused now and then to listen, not just for danger, but for the land itself. She turned back toward the hearth, where Nora sat on the floor with a scrap of wool and a needle clutched clumsily in one fist. Nolan leaned against the wall nearby, flipping through the pages of an old homestead ledger Holden had found in a trunk beneath the porch. Neither child had asked to leave. That night, after the children were asleep and the rain had softened to a whisper, Holden stayed seated near the cold hearth, his boots drying by the door. Zinnia sat beside him, her bare feet tucked beneath her skirt, one hand resting on the worn arm of the chair. "You ever think about before all this?" she asked, her voice low. "Sometimes," he said. "Not as much as I used to." She looked over at him. "What did you leave behind?" He was quiet for a stretch. Then, "A brother down near Rawlins. We were boys when the war ended. He took to the towns, always had a mind for business. I stayed out here. Did you leave angry?" "No," he said. "Just different roads." She nodded slowly, then turned her gaze toward the firewood stacked near the wall. "I had a sister," she said. "She got sick before the war ended. We buried her in the spring, under a cottonwood that leaned too far over the creek. I used to talk to her like she could still hear me." Holden didn't speak. He reached out, rested his hand lightly over hers where it lay on the chair's arm. She didn't pull away. "I think about her sometimes when Nora laughs," she said. "That same sound, like nothing ever touched her." Holden's thumb brushed once across the back of her hand. "Maybe she's still listening." Zinnia swallowed, her throat working. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment, "about building a root cellar behind the cabin, somewhere cool to keep what we grow. If the harvest's good." "It'll be good," Holden said. "You've got a way with things that need tending." She looked at him then, no hesitation in her eyes. "You'd help me build it?" He nodded. "Course I would." They didn't speak again that night, but when they rose to go to their beds, She stepped close and pressed her lips to his cheek, just above the line of his beard. Her breath warmed his skin, and when she stepped back, her hand lingered over his chest for a long, quiet second. The next morning, they cleared the ground behind the cabin for the cellar. Zinnia marked the lines with twine, and Holden broke the soil with a spade. Nolan helped haul away the rocks, his small arms straining, while Nora arranged them in neat piles like a game. By the end of the week, the hole was dug, and Holden began framing the walls with timber from the deadfall upriver. Zinnia worked beside him, hammering nails with the same focus she brought to sewing seams. "You know," she said one afternoon, wiping her brow with the hem of her sleeve, "I used to think quiet meant loneliness." Holden looked over, setting down the mallet. "And now it feels like safety." He nodded, then went back to fitting the next beam. They didn't speak again until the sun dropped behind the ridge. That night, Holden sat at the edge of the bed inside the cabin, the children already curled beneath the quilts. Zinnia stood behind him, brushing the dust from his shoulders with slow, careful hands. "You never ask for anything," she said. He turned slightly. "What would I ask for?" She stepped around to face him, her fingers still at the collar of his shirt. "Me." His eyes searched hers. "You're not something to ask for like a favor." "No," she said, "but I'm offering." Holden stood, his hands finding her waist gently, reverently. "Then I'd be a fool not to accept." She leaned into him, and this time when they kissed, it wasn't tentative. It was deep and earned and full of something steady, something bigger than either of them had known before. Later, after the oil lamp was turned low and the cabin had gone still, Holden lay beside her with one arm beneath her head and the other curled around her hip. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll finish the cellar. Then I'll ride to town for glass jars and sugar. We'll make preserves come fall." Zinnia smiled against his shoulder. "Sounds like a life." "It is," he said. "Ours." Outside, the rain had stopped, and a frog sang somewhere near the creek. Inside, Zinnia slept in peace for the first time in years, wrapped in arms that would never let her be hurt again. By July, the root cellar was finished, and jars of early preserves lined the shelves in neat rows: wild currant jam, pickled onions, and a few stoneware crocks of churned butter wrapped in cloth to keep cool. The garden yielded more than Zinnia had hoped. Her squash vines thickened, and corn sprouted tall and even. She'd marked the days by the growth of those stalks, and by how quickly Nora and Nolan found their rhythm in this new life. Holden had begun sleeping inside the cabin, in the bed they'd built together with cedar planks and a mattress stuffed with dried grass and wool. The children had their own cot in the corner, and Nora had taken to whispering stories to her brother by lamplight, her voice soft and careful not to wake the grown folks. One morning, while Holden was sharpening his scythe under the eaves, Zinnia stepped out from the cabin with a letter in her hand. Her expression was unreadable. "This came from Buffalo," she said, offering it. He took it without speaking, eyes scanning her face before he opened the envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar, tight, deliberate. "It's from your brother," she said, folding her arms. Holden read silently. When he finished, he folded the paper once and slipped it into his back pocket. "He's coming through next month. Says he's headed toward Yellowstone, but he'll stop a day or two." Zinnia watched him closely. "You want that?" He hesitated. "I ain't sure. Been years since I saw him. We didn't part angry, just different." She stepped closer. "You're not the same man you were then." He nodded. "No, I'm not." Later that week, they rode into Buffalo again, just the two of them this time. Nolan and Nora stayed behind with a neighbor Holden trusted, a widow named Mrs. Elkins, who lived 2 ridges east and had raised 5 children of her own. Zinnia had hesitated to leave the children, but they begged to stay, and the thought of a day alone with Holden, with no little hands pulling at her skirt, had softened her reluctance. The ride was quiet, not from tension but from the kind of comfort that comes when two people have already said the most important things. At the mercantile, Zinnia bartered for fabric and a tin of dried lavender, and Holden picked up a new draw knife for the barn siding he planned to finish before snow. On the way back, halfway between town and home, they stopped at a ridge that overlooked the valley. The wind shifted through the grass, warm and dry. Zinnia looked out over the hills. "I never imagined I'd come to feel safe again, or still." Holden reached for her hand. "I never imagined I'd build a life that mattered." She turned toward him. "You built more than that." He brushed her cheek with the backs of his fingers. "You gave it meaning." When they kissed, it wasn't urgent, it was full and slow, like the land around them, rooted in something deep. August brought Holden's brother, Cole, just as the letter said. He arrived on a bay gelding with dust on his coat and a rifle strapped across his back. He was leaner than Holden, darker in the eyes, and quick with his words. He stayed 3 days, asked questions, watched the way Zinnia moved through the cabin like she'd always belonged there. On the second night, after supper, Cole pulled Holden aside beneath the cottonwoods. "She's steady," he said. "And that boy of hers, he's got your patience." Holden leaned against the fence rail. "He's got his mother's grit." "You're doing right, brother. This is a good place. You've made it one." When Cole rode out, he left behind a bottle of Tennessee whiskey and a carved tobacco pouch, both wrapped in an oilskin. "For the wedding," he'd said with a wink. Holden didn't answer him, but he held the package tight. That evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Zinnia stepped out to find him sitting on the cabin steps, the bundle beside him. He looked up as she came near. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want the children to hear it when I do. But I need you to know first." She waited, heart steady. "I've never known peace till you, and I want to call you my wife, proper. Not just in the way we live, but in name and vow." Zinnia knelt in front of him. "Yes," she said, "I want that too." They were married 2 weeks later under the cottonwoods, with Mrs. Elkins standing witness and Nolan holding the ring carved from elk antler Holden had shaped himself. Zinnia wore a dress she'd sewn from cotton and lace remnants, and Nora had woven her a crown of wildflowers. They said their vows with the creek murmuring behind them, and Holden promised her not just safety, but partnership. Zinnia promised him not only love, but all the quiet strength she carried. They built a new room onto the cabin before the first frost, and by the time the first snow dusted the ridge, Nora had learned her letters and Nolan could split kindling without being asked. Come spring, a cradle stood beside the hearth. Zinnia sat there often, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other wrapped in Holden's as they watched the fire burn slow and steady. They never spoke of the past again, not because they feared it, but because they no longer carried it. They had each other, and the land, and the life they'd built from the hollowed-out places of what once was. And that was enough. Forever.